I usually talk about games in my videos, but from time to time I like to talk about interactive fiction and game books, and today we do talk about interactive fiction. In this video I'm gonna tell you about Superpowered by James Schannep, not 100% sure. Physical book, or at least I don't know if you can buy the file, but it can be bought, also purchased as a physical copy, as a good old 20th century book. And also it is an analog book in the sense that once you print it, it works perfectly. It's not a text adventure. Also, it is not exactly a game book in the sense that it doesn't have game mechanics. It is all about the story. It's all about, if you do this, go to that page. If you want to do that other thing, go to that other page. So it's narrative based, and it is about the narrative. It is also narrative based in the sense that there isn't a main objective. Sometimes even when the game is not a challenge, when the book is not a game challenge like you have in fighting fantasy games, you still have an optimal ending that in a certain sense you're challenged to find. That happened very often in the books of the Endless Quest series by TSR, where there was a mission and you got a clear sense if you made the right choices and you reached the right conclusion, you completed the mission, you got a real sense that, well, that was the right solution, you found the optimal ending. In a certain sense, you got the sense of like that you have won. And if you reach a negative ending, you got the sense not just that you reached a negative ending and your character, your avatar had been doomed, but also that you sort of like lost the challenge. This wasn't the case, for example, with the Choose Your Own Adventure books. They very often were just about narratives, where you would have several good endings and several negative endings and several cryptic, mysterious endings that you didn't really know what the heck were they for, and that was part of the charm too. It made, in a certain sense, feel more realistic, because in life sometimes good stuff happens, sometimes bad stuff happens, and sometimes WTF stuff happens, and you have no idea if that in the long run will be good or bad. I'm saying this, I'm giving you this framework here, because Superpowered definitely is a book for adults, or at least for mature readers, although I didn't find any particularly inappropriate material, but if nothing else, for the font and the length, clearly this is not a book for children. But what I like is that it seems to harken back to the idea of the Choose Your Own Adventure books, that is, not exactly a challenge, but an engine to tell story, to use the branching literature form to connect together a lot of different possible plots. And even the Choose Your Adventure series wasn't always like that. The early titles in the series were like choose, among like 40 endings, 30 endings, and so on and so forth. Then later, the Choose Your Adventure book became much more linear. Choose Your Adventure books became much more linear. They became like 10 endings, 8 endings, even, etc., etc., etc. So what I like about this is that Superpowered got what I like about my favorite Choose Your Own Adventure books, which is the variety. The freedom of enjoying the stories that may go in a lot of different directions, that huge sense of surprise, of discovery that you have by having many different alternative plots all mixed together in a single book. They took that and the author improved that idea of like a rich narrative engine that goes in a ton of different directions, and gave it the form of a book for adults. Because yes, I still like to go back and read some Choose Your Own Adventure books, and I still enjoy seeing the design and some of the scenes, but clearly part of the magic is gone, because now I can see that they were for children, and I read them first time when I was a child, so that wasn't a problem. But now pretty much I have a book which is for me, for the kind of audience that I am now, a little more sophisticated and demanding, for an adult reader, but that gives me the joy, the fun, the wonder of navigating a completely chaotic, unpredictable maze of narrative options, like the Choose Your Own Adventures books did, but with a perspective now, with an adult, with more meat, with more humor, with more interesting situations. And to me, it's fascinating now that people are going back to writing this kind of book, and so that actually this is not just second a renaissance of interactive fiction. So this is almost like a golden age. In terms of numbers, they used to publish many more back in the 80s, many more than they do now. But golden age in terms of quality, because well, now you have people that were 10-year-old when the original interactive books came out, and they are 30 or 40 now. And so they have more availability to buy big books. They are more willing, since they are adult now, to read complex and long stories. And so pretty much it seems to me that now the interactive form really is reaching its potential, and cannot be by chance that now some of the longest interactive fiction that was ever written is getting published, or some of the longest is getting written. Back in the day, this book would have had very little audience because the people that like this sort of like branching fiction were too young to appreciate such a long and complex book. So now we readers of interactive fiction have reached our potential, and the form also is reaching. So that's also awesome. So what is this book about? Again, it's about superheroes. You probably figured that out. But structurally and experientially, is really about a multi-universe, meaning in the sense it's about a story that can go in so many different directions. It is not so much about winning or losing, it's about the joy of discovering different stories, the joy of seeing how small decisions may branch out into very different directions. It says right here, more than 50 possible endings, and to me this is the strength of the book. One of the strengths, at least, the enormous narrative variety. Also, something quite interesting is that 3 unique storylines. Now, that is something that you don't see many times in interactive fiction, in game books. In this story, you are a person of unspecified gender, so perfectly gender neutral, either gender or any other gender out there can identify with the protagonist, with this unspecified you that the narrative is addressing. And you may get involved in an experiment that may give you superpowers. And the experiment may give you 1 or 3 superpowers. I'm not giving you too many, trying not to give you too many spoilers. But that means that you will go really through storylines that are quite different from one another, and that will give you different challenges and different encounters, and will give your fantasies of having superpowers different topics to elaborate. Also, several of these storylines will lead you to make a moral decision and to decide whether you want to be good or evil. So in truth, you have 3 unique storylines, and within each you still then have the possibility of like being a super villain with that power or superhero with that power. That really makes this rhizomatic book a trove, a treasure, a vault of different narrative situations. So because in one page I may be a superhero with a certain power, then I go back, I reread some other plot lines, and 20 minutes later I'm reading a story in which I'm a super villain with a completely different power. Maybe I'm fighting against a superhero that more or less what was the kind of character that I was in the other plot line. So very interesting, very fascinating. If you like superheroes, clearly the author knows what he's talking about. Clearly the author is very comfortable with the material. There are references, allusions, quotes, all of these elements that show you that he knows what he's talking about. He makes references, usually humorously, affectionately though. It's when the author is making fun of elements from superhero lore, it's not with sarcasm or like with bitter irony, but clearly with affection, with the affection of a fan, of somebody that appreciates the genre to start with. And that probably is the best tone with fiction about superheroes. I mean, I've read books, prose books about superheroes, non-interactive ones, and some interactive ones too. And it's tough. The superhero genre is tough somehow to render in prose form. It just, there's something strange about it. It's almost like the theme doesn't really mesh very well with the form when you take it too seriously. Somehow I have a story about Batman, and the story is dark and gloomy, and the illustrations and the colors give me that sense, and I'm into that atmosphere, and it's believable that there's this dude dressed like a bat that jumps over the roofs of Gotham City and does dark stuff, and etc. etc. Really works. In prose form, there's something a little silly about it. I don't know why. So to me, the best way of addressing this is simply to start not taking the material 100% seriously to start with, and the author here does a very good job at that. So the story is taken seriously enough that you care about what happens, that you want to know if you survive, if you're going to kill somebody by mistake with your superpowers, if you're going to save this or that person. But at the same time, there is a constant irony, there is a constant humor that makes reading the book particularly pleasant, but at the same time, also, to me, strange enough, makes the subject more believable. This is the tone in which I can relate to a book about superheroes, to a prose book about superheroes, and I can get into that idea. Somehow it makes it more believable. There's a little bit of a comedical tone, which wouldn't necessarily work with other genres, but to me works very well with the superhero genre. It is about people that fly, after all. With the superhero genre, and maybe again just because the written word, the literature, the arts, there's a certain intrinsic lofty quality in anything and everything that is printed in a book and doesn't have color illustrations. But again, the humorous approach really works to me. I talked about the illustration. There's something I really like about this book, that it doesn't have any, which may seem strange. I'm not saying this ironically or sarcastically. It's just that I've seen several interactive books lately whose art was pretty subpar, and I'm like, you know what, just don't give me any art if you're not ready to. And the prose is evocative enough, the situation is interesting enough that I can pretty much picture the situation in my head. The prose does enough of a good job describing each situation. I don't feel the need for illustrations. Yes, if we could go back to the golden days of fighting fantasy illustrators, then those are incredibly powerful and evocative. But if you don't have those, then this could be the way to go in case you're planning to write interactive fiction. Don't get stuck trying to get art unless you really have it really, really good. Because a book that doesn't have any but is well written is evocative enough, and paradoxically, again, a book with mediocre art weakens the overall experience. So it's about the joy of flying around or using other superpowers, which I'm not revealing to you, and seeing where the story goes, which again seems obvious, but not all interactive fiction is about that. Well, this one is about that. The author clearly had that idea. How many stories can I compress in my book, and how many crazy different directions can I lead my reader? And the author does a really good job of structuring an interesting branching trio decisions, creating interesting, compelling, entertaining scenes, creating funny characters. So at all levels, I really like it. Again, the production values, they don't seem particularly spectacular when you see that the book doesn't have any illustrations, but the cover is nice. The physical volume is good. It's solid. And there is a lot to read. And this is great. The book is longer than it looks, but since it's pleasant to read, then, well, there's added value. If you're enjoying something, I'm no one that reads a book rushing to the end so I can tell myself that I'm done with it. And this is really is a book that you inhabit, the book that you explore, that you navigate. The fun is losing yourself, this maze of possible stories, not to look for this or that specific story. So good stuff. There's also one note that I had to say, which really I haven't seen in any other interactive book that I've read, and I've read quite a few. The sections have titles, and that I have seen. This is not so unusual. But what is really peculiar is that the sections of the titles of the sections are in alphabetical order. Just look at the first couple of letters of each section, and having alphabetically ordered section titles may not be super amazing per se in a linear book, but it is quite impressive in a book that is not linear at all. because they are alphabetically going from this page to this page, but then of course you're jumping from letter to letter, from section to section. I don't know how it was done. Maybe just the book was written as it was supposed to, and then the author went there and added the titles in order, and then maybe made some changes to match the titles from a text that wouldn't have a corresponding theme. I don't know, but I have to say it's a small thing, it's a small detail, but I enjoyed it, and definitely told me that the author has taken the work of writing this book seriously, because there was no need to do that. It's not somebody who just was just, you know, like pouring out whatever came out from his mind. He gave some thought about the design and the overall profile of the book. It's an act of love to me. It's really the going there and giving this strange, surreal alphabetical order to sections that are not in order structurally within the book. To me, strikes me as an act of love. A little gratuitous, yes, but it likes me. It likes me. What does that even mean? I like it. Does the book like me? I don't know. I don't know. I have to ask it later. Book, do you like me? I don't know. What I know is that I do like this book, whether or not the book reciprocates. It's a good book. It's a really good book if you're into interactive fiction. If you like superhero, this book is gonna let you spend a couple of really entertaining hours. It's fun to read. Each individual scene is well crafted. The style is entertaining, and the overall construction, I think I talked about is abundantly already, is very good. Superpowered by James Schannep. A really good example of this returning genre of the game book / narratively oriented interactive fiction. A really good sign that the genre is back, and actually not only is it back, but I think it is now better than it ever was.